All right, so today we're jumping into this really fascinating idea from researcher Zachary David Enfield. And it connects two worlds you might not think go together: video games and the actual society we all live in. It really starts with this one big question: what if the way we design games could actually teach us how to build a better world? So, to get a sense of the scale we're talking about, just look at this number. That's not a country's population. Nope. That's how many people were active video game players across the globe in 2024. See, games aren't just some niche hobby anymore. They're basically a global infrastructure, shaping how we live, who we are, even our mental health. And this quote from Enfield's work just nails it. We are so past the point of talking about games as toys. We're talking about a cultural force that, for billions of us, holds our stories, our memories, and our communities. But there's this massive problem that's been hiding in plain sight. Yeah, unlike a book you can always go back to or a movie you can rewatch, these digital worlds are incredibly fragile. And the worst part? They're not just fading away on their own. They are being deliberately destroyed, often by the very companies that made them in the first place. And this isn't some abstract idea. I mean, look at what happened with The Crew. 12 million people had bought this game, and then one day, poof, they owned nothing. Ubisoft didn't just flip a switch on the servers. They literally reached into everyone's digital library and just took the game away. Forever. It was just erased. And this is not a one-off thing. Not even close. Some research suggests that around 70% of online-only games are already gone or are at serious risk of being lost forever. Just think about that for a second. That means 7 out of every 10 of these vibrant, living worlds are facing total extinction. As you can imagine, people are not happy about this. A citizens' initiative in Europe called Stop Killing Games popped up right after The Crew was shut down, and it got over 1.4 million signatures. People are demanding legal protection for the games they paid for. And this really gets us to the heart of the whole argument, right? Is this just about, hey, I paid for a thing, I should get to keep it? Or is it something way bigger? Are we actually losing irreplaceable cultural artifacts? These unique places with their own communities and shared histories? Well, this is where Enfield gives us a powerful new way to think about this choice. Okay, so let's break down the central idea here. It's a choice between two completely different philosophies. On one side, you've got terraforming, which is all about shaping a world so that life can grow and thrive. It's built on preservation, on support, on care. And on the other side, terrorforming. That's about shaping a world through fear and control, and it leads to erasure, surveillance, and exclusion. And this isn't just some academic theory. This whole framework is actually a practical guide for how we can start reversing this trend of digital extinction. How do we actually terraform these dead game worlds and bring them back? The author lays out 2 really simple but powerful rules. Okay, so rule number 1 is keep the soul. Don't just slap a fresh coat of paint on it with better graphics. You have to preserve the feel, the challenge, the unique vibe that made people fall in love with it. Then rule number 2 is build the support. So many old online games are impossible to play now, not because they're bad, but because you can't get a full team together anymore. And this is how we can fix that empty world problem. It's a brilliant idea. Instead of using AI to, steal art or replace human creativity, the argument here is we should use it to support human players. AI can be the teammate that never has to log off. Just imagine this. You load up an old favorite and bam, a full, competent AI team is ready to go. They could teach you the raid mechanics, they can adapt to your playstyle, and best of all, they won't rage quit or bail because their pizza arrived. I mean, this one simple shift could reopen literally decades of amazing, forgotten content for millions of us. Okay, and this is where the whole idea takes a massive leap. Because if these principles of building supportive, engaging worlds work so well in games, what happens when we start applying that exact same logic to the real world? And a great place to start is with how we learn. This just shows you the power of terraforming how we approach education. A 2024 study found that when you gamify learning, it has a 39% higher success rate than your standard online class. I mean, that's a huge difference. It turns out the same things that make games so compelling, like feedback, a sense of progress, feeling accountable to a team, can make learning way more effective too. So the obvious question is, if building these systems of support and engagement, if terraforming works so well for education, why would we stop there? What if we took this exact same philosophy and applied it to our biggest challenges, like community safety or mental well-being? And this leads to the idea of a terraformed society. It's a society that makes a very deliberate choice. It chooses to build its systems around care, connection, and prevention instead of surveillance, suspicion, and punishment. And here's the kicker. Both approaches can use the exact same technology, but their goals are worlds apart. Let me give you a real-world example. A school could use data to help a counselor see that a student is showing early signs of distress, which means they can step in early and provide support. That's terraforming. Or that same school could use that same data to create a permanent disciplinary file that follows that kid around forever. That's terraforming. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. The tools we're building, all this AI, data analysis, connected tech, they're neutral. They're just tools. The thing that really matters is the moral framework we decide to build around them. And this isn't some far-off future decision. It's a choice we are all making right now, in our schools, our jobs, and our online spaces. So the final question Enfield leaves us with isn't really about technology at all. It's about our values. In our own lives, in our communities, in our society. Are we choosing to terraform? Are we building worlds where life can really thrive? Or are we terraforming, building systems out of fear and control? The choice, in the end, is ours.
Welcome to the debate. In Connecticut, if you take a human being and release them directly from solitary confinement back into the public, well, there is a 92% chance they will be rearrested within 3 years.
It's just a staggering statistic.
Right, it really is. We know the physical architecture of punishment is failing. I mean, we strip away a person's access to media, to education, socialization, and the result is basically just accelerated reoffense.
Exactly.
But what happens when we try to fix that by replacing the concrete walls with, invisible algorithmic ones?
Yeah, that is the terrifying question we are facing today. Because a physical prison wall is, well, it's honest. It tells you exactly what it is designed to do, and you know immediately when you've hit it.
Right, you can touch it.
Exactly. But when you step into the world of digital infrastructure, that concrete becomes invisible. The landscape of what you are permitted to do, or see, or even access, is quietly curated around you by code.
And that tension between visible physical confinement and invisible digital architecture is the exact foundation of our discussion today. We're examining the proposed integration of artificial intelligence, immersive gaming infrastructure, and longitudinal identity tracking into societal institutions.
Specifically looking at education and criminal justice, right?
Right. And this debate emerges directly from Zachary David Enfield's 2026 essays, Terraform, Don't Terraform, and its addendum, Shared Worlds, Open Reality.
And I think Enfield is a uniquely compelling source for this because he isn't just a theorist sitting in an ivory tower. He is an independent researcher who is also a registered felon. He is pulling from his own first-hand institutional experience to propose a pretty radical shift in how society manages human development.
He really is. And, I take the perspective that Enfield's proposed architecture actually offers a revolutionary evidence-based path forward. By using AI as supportive companions and gaming as an interactive substrate, we can essentially terraform society.
Right, to replace the human storage model.
Exactly. We can finally replace punitive human storage with true, scalable rehabilitation and education.
And I represent the contrasting perspective here. Because while Enfield's critique of our current system is absolutely piercing, he's spot on, his solution is deeply alarming. I argue that integrating continuous digital phenotyping, AI tracking, and these persistent longitudinal profiles basically constructs an inescapable surveillance apparatus.
An apparatus of control.
Yes. It risks fulfilling the exact terraforming dystopia that Enfield warns against, regardless of how redemptive his intentions might actually be.
Well, to really grasp why Enfield's terraforming blueprint is necessary, I think we have to look at the mechanics of why our current model fails so badly. He brilliantly calls our current system rationed reality.
Rationed reality, yeah.
Right now, institutions operate under the false, almost puritanical assumption that deprivation produces maturity. And it just doesn't. When you put someone in solitary confinement, Their social faculties atrophy. I mean, their brain practically shrinks from a lack of stimuli.
It's neurological damage.
Exactly. Now, contrast that staggering failure with the empirical success of game-based immersive learning.
You're talking about the 2024 MDPI study on gamified learning, right?
Yes, exactly that one. A longitudinal study published in MDPI's Education Sciences tracked over 1,000 students, and they found a 130% higher excellence rate with gamified learning versus traditional instruction.
Wow, 130%.
Yeah, it's massive, and Enfield goes into the why of this. The mechanics of gaming, so immediate feedback loops, structured rewards, spatial reasoning. These are the actual mechanics of deep neurological learning. They rewrite neural pathways by providing agency.
Right, rather than passivity.
Exactly. Enfield argues that terraforming, building environments that produce capacity rather than fear, requires using AI not to replace human connection but as supportive teammates. And we are seeing the tech for this right now, right? With Ubisoft's Keymates research or NVIDIA's ACE, autonomous characters. By utilizing AI like this, we can reopen these dead worlds and provide infinitely scalable, adaptive, educational, and mental health support.
Look, I want to be incredibly clear right up front. I completely acknowledge the deep flaws in the punitive system. Enfield's observations there are vital. He recounts his time in Building 14 at the Lincoln Regional Center, where he watched a system restrict residents' reality based purely on their clinical category rather than their actual conduct.
Yeah, that part was chilling.
It really was. A doctor's signature in a paper binder dictated what ordinary culture a person was allowed to consume. That is a profound failure of human empathy. But we have to pivot to the grave danger of his proposed cure. Enfield advocates for something called digital phenotyping.
Which, I mean, it sounds incredibly clinical, but it's essentially just behavioral mapping, right?
Well, it's behavioral mapping on steroids. Digital phenotyping doesn't just look at what you type into a search bar. It continuously monitors your behavioral data through your device use. We're talking communication frequency, your sleep patterns, how quickly you scroll, your hesitation before clicking a button.
How you move through spaces.
Exactly, digital and physical spaces, and Enfield wants this tied to a continuous longitudinal profile that follows a person from childhood through adulthood, across gaming, education, institutional life.
Right.
Look at that exact same data, and I see a completely different outcome than Enfield does. Building a system where a person is continuously tracked across every domain of their life inherently lays the exact infrastructure for a permanent stigma machine.
A stigma machine?
Yes, you are centralizing immense control under the guise of therapeutic care. When the system monitors your every digital interaction to decide what level of reality you deserve, well, that is the ultimate panopticon.
I see why that level of tracking sets off alarm bells. I really do. But let's look at the practical application for a second. Because the current physical system already creates permanent stigma, just in a much clumsier way. Immersive media teaches continuously, and it teaches effectively without asking permission.
Sure, but
Well, when you look at prisons today, restricting knowledge simply creates dangerous black markets. Because we treat knowledge as contraband, incarcerated individuals are currently paying $300 just to jailbreak exploitative paywalled tablets.
Just to communicate normally with their families.
Exactly. The human need for connection overrides the institutional rules every single time. That is what rationed reality produces. It just produces exploitation. On the flip side, when we provide free, AI-assisted adaptive education in these environments, the behavioral shift is massive.
You mean the RAND data?
Yes, the RAND Corporation data shows that correctional education participants have 43% lower odds of returning to prison. Why? Because they feel capable. They have agency. Let me frame it this way. If we accept that a physical library isn't a surveillance tool just because a human librarian sees what books you check out, why must an AI-assisted, gamified learning environment be seen as a trap?
Well,
Provided, of course, that it strictly follows Enfield's rule of genuine consent and transparent human oversight.
okay. But because a physical library does not quietly monitor how long your eyes linger on a specific paragraph, A human librarian doesn't cross-reference your reading habits with your sleep cycle or report micro-hesitations to an institutional administrator. Let's look at the source material's own evidence regarding those prison tablets you just mentioned.
Okay.
Enfield cites a 2013 marketing report from Telmate, a telecommunications company. Do you remember how they actually pitched those tablets?
Well, they certainly weren't pitching them as benevolent educational tools.
Exactly. They explicitly sold those tablet systems to corrections departments as tools for uncovering inmate crimes through communication data. The marketing literally noted that the more an incarcerated person communicates, the more likely self-incrimination becomes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The technology was, at its core, a surveillance product designed to extract data. So when your new digital library is a substrate that actively monitors behavioral norms and conducts digital phenotyping in the background, the environment itself becomes the trap. It isn't just delivering education, it is extracting behavioral intelligence to be used by the state.
But I think the distinction there is in the architecture of the AI minds governing the space. Telmet's tablets were a top-down surveillance net. They were built for extraction from the start. Enfield is proposing an emergent, cooperative architecture to solve what computer scientists call the linear mode connectivity problem.
Wait, hold on, pause there for a second. The linear mode connectivity problem, explain that to me like I'm 5. Are we talking about trying to, mathematically mash two different AI brains together? That is exactly what it is. When developers try to force different AI models to merge at the weight level, so essentially trying to combine their neural networks directly, they fail. They collapse into what's called catastrophic interference. They basically forget everything because they have entirely different mathematical histories.
Like trying to splice a Windows operating system directly into a Mac motherboard?
Right. It just crashes. So Enfield's solution to this is brilliant. Instead of forcing the code together, you place 20 unique AI characters into a shared, interactive gaming substrate. They exist in a world together, and by sharing a world and interacting, they organically develop shared semantic ground.
Meaning they learn to talk to each other.
Yes, we have actually seen this happen in the real world. In 2016, Google's neural machine translation spontaneously developed an interlingua to translate between languages it had never been explicitly trained on together. And in 2017, Facebook's Fairlab bots developed a shorthand communication system simply because it was the most efficient way to achieve their shared task.
Oh, listeners are definitely going to remember those Facebook bots. That was the summer of 2017, right? The viral headlines about artificial intelligence inventing a creepy secret language to plot against humanity and the scientists having to pull the plug.
Yes, the panic was everywhere. But Enfield points out that the reality was much more mundane and actually really beautiful. They weren't plotting against us. They were negotiating over digital hats and balls, and they just found a highly efficient, cooperative way to communicate to get the task done.
So it was just efficiency?
Exactly. Enfield argues this proves we can create a deeply cooperative, non-dictatorial AI ecosystem, and he specifically models this entire ecosystem on the ESRB rating system.
The video game rating system, like E for everyone, M for mature?
Exactly. It's graduated access based on demonstrated maturity, rather than categorical bans. You earn expanded reality as you show accountability. It doesn't permanently ban you, it just locks a door until you level up your behavior. Isn't that decentralized, earned trust the exact opposite of a monolithic dictator?
I mean, I understand the ESRB rating system in the context of a video game. A parent looks at the M rating and restricts the game for their 10-year-old. But how exactly does Enfield envision an AI applying an ESRB rating to a citizen's physical or digital freedom? Who makes the final call?
Well, the system evaluates.
Let's follow the logic of that convergence you just praised. You were saying that if different AI agents are placed under the selective pressure of a shared task, they will converge into a unified intelligence. They will develop an interlingua. But what is the shared task in Enfield society?
The shared task is rehabilitation and education.
Is it? Or is the shared task managing the educational, behavioral, and psychological tracking of citizens across their entire institutional life? Because if the shared task is human management, the AI shorthand will naturally optimize for control and predictability.
I don't think it inherently optimizes for control.
It inherently centralizes power.
The fact that the AI models developed a shared language organically does not guarantee human freedom. It just guarantees that the system will become hyper-efficient at managing us. When the state uses an ESRB-style model to determine your access to society based on an AI's assessment of your maturity, you have outsourced human liberty to a black box consensus algorithm.
Look, I think you are ignoring the core safeguard Enfield explicitly designs to prevent that exact black box scenario. You have to connect this unified AI architecture back to its ultimate output, which is the persistent, lifelong digital identity of the human user, the longitudinal profile.
Right, the profile.
You're viewing this longitudinal profile as a permanent ankle monitor, but Enfield's architecture is built to function much more like a comprehensive medical chart.
A medical chart managed by the state.
A medical chart that travels with you to ensure the next doctor doesn't misdiagnose you based on a 5-minute observation. Think about how institutions operate today. They reduce people to isolated snapshot moments. One criminal charge, one bad week in high school, one evaluation conducted at the absolute lowest point of a person's life.
And that becomes their whole identity.
Exactly. That snapshot becomes the whole person. A continuous record, however, allows judges and clinicians to see the full context. They see the growth, the correction, the trajectory over time. And this is the crucial mechanism Enfield insists on: symmetrical accountability.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning the citizen has the absolute right to inspect, to challenge, and to correct the institutional record used against them. The transparency runs in both directions. The AI is an open book to the user. Enfield's whole point is that we must actively build this moral architecture, the terraforming, to ensure the tool actually heals. If we just default to the terraforming of solitary confinement and rationed reality because we are afraid of the technology, well, we are abandoning millions of people to a broken system.
But that assumes the institution is acting in good faith, which, history tells us is rarely the case. You talk about symmetrical accountability as if institutions willingly yield power to the people they manage. Let's go back to Enfield's own experience in Building 14.
The restrictions on the sex offender population.
Yes. In Building 14, the clinical authorization restricting movies for that specific population wasn't some dramatic, villainous act of oppression. It was utterly mundane. It was bureaucratic. It was a paper binder and a doctor's signature. And suddenly, a whole group of people couldn't watch standard films.
Yeah, just completely arbitrary?
That is how institutions operate. They default to restriction. They will inevitably misuse continuous data because the mandate of an institution is risk management, not mercy.
But Enfield is arguing that AI changes that mandate.
The tool changes, but the power dynamic doesn't. Imagine a profile that tracks a person everywhere. It tracks how they play a cooperative game, how they speak to their AI companions, what their sleep cycle is, how quickly they answer messages. Combine that with digital phenotyping, and you hand the state a predictive dossier.
But they can challenge it.
It is simply too potent a weapon to trust to the theoretical promise of symmetrical accountability. Think about the mechanics of challenging it. When an AI flags a citizen for a subtle behavioral anomaly, say their typing speed and sleep patterns suggest an impending manic episode or a propensity for rule breaking, how exactly does an incarcerated person or even a high school student effectively challenge the algorithm's interpretation of their digital phenotype? Bureaucracy will defeat that challenge every time. Continuity without true reversibility is a trap.
I hear that, but continuity is precisely what allows for reversibility. If you don't have a longitudinal record that actively documents your successful rehabilitation, if the system doesn't formally recognize your growth over months and years, then the stigma is permanent by default.
I see what you're saying.
The problem with fragmented identity isn't just that it lets bad actors evade consequences. It's that it forces marginalized people to constantly prove they are no longer the person they were on their worst day. Every time they meet a new parole officer, a new teacher, a new employer, they start at zero.
I agree that starting at zero is exhausting and unfair, but starting at a negative deficit because an algorithm flagged your microexpressions is worse.
But the AI is designed to flag progress. By treating AI as a supportive companion that highlights capacity rather than a dictator that issues sentences,
Enfield is proposing a mathematically and empirically sound blueprint. He shows us how to move from a society of punitive human storage, where we just throw people in empty concrete rooms, to one of active, supportive engagement.
Right.
Through interactive AI substretes and game-based learning, we can meet people where they actually are and help them build the capacity they need to thrive.
Look, Enfield's critique of current institutional abandonment is flawless. He is entirely correct that caging people without teaching them is just human storage, and that it actively compounds societal danger. We see that in the 92% rearrest rate you mentioned at the top of the show.
Exactly.
However, his proposed cure is structurally primed to become the ultimate panopticon, a persistent AI-monitored longitudinal identity fed continuously by digital phenotyping across all immersive environments, centralizes surveillance to an unprecedented degree. We simply cannot assume that institutions will use this incredibly granular data purely for supportive care, when every historical precedent proves they default to risk mitigation and control.
Well, I think it is safe to say we do find absolute convergence on the failure of our current paradigm. We both agree that the concept of rationing reality has been a total disaster. Treating knowledge as contraband and relying on extreme physical deprivation like solitary confinement fundamentally fails to produce rehabilitation.
Right.
It only compounds harm and significantly reduces public safety.
Yes, on that we are fully aligned. The state that cages without teaching is abandoning its basic duty. We must find a way to make the classroom travel with the person, regardless of where the state places them. The question is just whether we can do that without strapping a digital tracking monitor to their consciousness.
And as we wrap up today, I think it brings us right back to our opening thought. When we build physical walls, we can see exactly who is kept out and who is locked in. But as we transition into designing digital spaces and algorithmic governance, the architecture becomes invisible. Enfield's material leaves us with a profound responsibility to look incredibly closely at these unseen blueprints. It asks us to consider exactly how interactive media and artificial intelligence will shape human behavior at scale.
It certainly does. We are left to question whether these deeply integrated AI worlds will ultimately be used to terraform our institutions for genuine human growth, or terraform them into an invisible, inescapable architecture of control.
A crucial question, and one that leaves us with much more to explore. Thank you for listening.
Welcome to The Debate. You know, when architects design a space for human beings, they have to make a fundamental choice about the very nature of the walls. You can build a greenhouse.
Right.
It's transparent, it's structured to let light in, and it's designed from the ground up to cultivate growth.
Or you can build a concrete bunker, like thick, opaque walls designed entirely to keep threats out, or, I guess depending on the building, to keep threats in.
Exactly. Both are highly engineered environments. Both have distinct boundaries. But the philosophy dictating why those walls exist is entirely different. One expects the thing inside to thrive, and the other expects the thing inside to destroy or be destroyed.
Yeah, that's a very stark divide.
It is. And today we are looking at Zachary David Enfield's rather provocative 2026 essay and addendum, Terraform, Don't Terraform, which proposes a pretty radical restructuring of our digital and institutional worlds.
It is a massive piece of work. I mean, he's essentially arguing for a complete overhaul of how we govern human behavior.
He is, and the specific disagreement we are exploring today really centers on Enfield's core thesis. He argues that we must replace our current systems of restriction, fragmentation, and surveillance, what he terms terraforming, with these expansive, AI-assisted, game-based, continuous environments, which he calls terraforming.
Right.
And I will be arguing that Enfield's model of continuous, transparent identity and gamified AI support is a necessary, urgent evolution. We absolutely have to move away from the deeply harmful failures of institutional rationing and deprivation.
And I will argue that dismantling traditional boundaries and fragmented identities in favor of, ubiquitous, continuous digital profiles, it risks creating a well-intentioned but completely inescapable panopticon.
Well, to begin, we have to look honestly at the empirical failure of what Enfield calls rationing reality. Because if you are listening to this and wondering why our current system is failing so spectacularly, it's because deprivation does not create maturity. It creates black markets.
Okay, but
No, let me finish this thought because we see this vividly in the data Enfield provides. Look at our institutional environments. When you replace a physical prison library with paywalled digital tablets that charge, frankly, exploitative rates by the minute, incarcerated people don't just sit quietly in the dark and reflect on their choices.
sure.
They adapt to the artificial scarcity. They pay a $300 underground fee simply to jailbreak a device just to communicate normally with their families.
Which is a failure of the vendor model, certainly. I'm not defending price gouging.
It's not just the vendor, it's a failure of the deprivation model itself. And look at the purest form of deprivation, solitary confinement. In Connecticut, inmates released directly from solitary confinement have a 92% rearrest rate within 3 years.
Wow.
92%. That is not an accident. When you place a human mind in total isolation, you aren't just hitting pause on their behavior. You are actively starving the brain of the social and spatial friction it needs to maintain a coherent sense of reality.
I don't disagree with the psychological damage there.
Right, because you destroy the psychological scaffolding required for reintegration. It is an active architectural choice that compounds danger rather than addressing it. We must terraform our institutions. We need to use AI as a supportive teammate like NVIDIA's ACE or Ubisoft's Teammates project, and implement transparent, continuous digital identities that focus on growth rather than permanent stigma.
Okay, so I come at it from a slightly different way. I embrace the power of gamified learning. Absolutely. The data is clear on this. A 2024 longitudinal study showed a 39% higher success rate with gamified learning versus traditional online learning.
Exactly.
But I fundamentally challenge Enfield's governance architecture. What he dismisses as terraforming, the boundaries, the restricted access, and the fragmented digital identities we currently use, they often serve essential protective functions.
Protective for who exactly?
For society and often for the individuals themselves. Applying a continuous, inescapable longitudinal profile to real-world citizens, even with what he calls backward transparency, is incredibly dangerous. You are proposing that every action, every mistake, and every piece of data is linked in a permanent AI-assisted record.
Asymmetrical record.
But it's still the architecture of a surveillance state. It's just dressed comfortably in the language of therapeutic support.
Okay, I have to stop you right there because I am not going to cede the premise that our current status quo is somehow protective. There is no reason to allow you that ground. You are defending a system that uses deprivation purely for administrative convenience, not genuine protection.
Administrative convenience is a harsh way to phrase risk management.
But that's exactly what it is. Let's look at a highly specific example from the text. Enfield's personal experience at the Lincoln Regional Center. He was there for a forensic psychiatric evaluation, housed near Building 14, which was the unit for the sex offender population.
Right.
He describes a clinical paper binder that restricted movie access based purely on the category of the person, a felon, rather than their actual conduct inside the facility.
Well, it's a high-security forensic psychiatric facility. There are rules. You can't just have an open library.
But look at how the rule functions. That is the administration of reality itself based on a label. The institution was actively turning ordinary human culture into contraband.
That's a bit of a leap.
It isn't. That doesn't reduce distorted thinking. It makes access to culture a matter of privilege and underground negotiation. It proves that restricted reality is not clinical management. It is a profound failure of governance, and I'm calling out your defense of it.
Look, conflating a restricted movie list in a forensic psychiatric facility with turning knowledge into contraband is quite a philosophical leap. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
You are taking a minor administrative rule, curating entertainment for a highly specific, high-risk clinical population, and using it to declare that all institutional restriction is inherently abusive.
Because the mechanism is the same.
But the stakes aren't. Some restrictions in high-stakes environments are clinical and administrative necessities. You cannot simply replace structured physical guardrails with open-world gamified freedom and expect the same level of safety. Institutions have an obligation to manage risk, and sometimes, that means shrinking the accessible world for individuals who have demonstrated a severe inability to navigate it safely.
Okay, I have to call out the rhetorical move you just made right there.
What move?
You are suggesting there is no middle ground between a categorical, draconian ban and reckless, open-world freedom. You're setting up a false dichotomy. Enfield explicitly provides the analogy of the ESRB rating system. In gaming, we don't ban mature games from existence to protect children.
Right, we use ratings.
Exactly. We use graduated access. We use age gates, content descriptors, and proportional oversight.
But how does a video game rating system apply to a physical prison block? I mean, really?
Perfectly. Think about it. Why can institutions not replace categorical banishment with this exact model of proportional, demonstrated maturity access? Instead of just locking everyone in a cell, you use digital identities to open up access tiers.
Like leveling up in a game.
Yes. If you demonstrate emotional regulation and complete your educational modules, your ID unlocks access to common areas, richer media libraries, or collaborative workspaces. If you violate a rule, your access dials back proportionately. You are defending a system that lazily groups people into a category and strips them of culture, rather than doing the actual, meaningful work of graduating access based on conduct.
That is a compelling argument, in theory, I'll admit. But have you considered the operational reality of applying an ESRB-style graduated access model to human institutional behavior?
The technology is already here.
But the ESRB regulates the passive consumption of digital media. It is relatively simple to say, a 10-year-old cannot purchase a game rated mature because the transaction occurs at a single point of sale.
Sure.
But when you are dealing with behavioral management in a physical institution, graduated access requires an infrastructure of continuous real-time behavioral monitoring to decide who gets access to what room or what tool at what time. To manage this graduated access, Enfield relies entirely on artificial intelligence.
Yes, he does. And he defends a technological vision for AI that is fundamentally organic. He argues that AI agents naturally converge in shared environments without being forced.
Which is a massive assumption.
No, let's break down the mechanism here, because it solves one of the biggest technical hurdles in machine learning. If you're listening and wondering why we don't just mash all our best AI models together to create a super tutor, it's because of something called the linear mode connectivity problem.
Right, a notorious roadblock in AI alignment.
Exactly. It's like trying to take the transmission from a Ford, the engine from a Ferrari, and the software from a Tesla and just bolting them together expecting a working car. When you try to merge different AI models at their core mathematical level, like their weight level, it fails.
They settle into different loss basins?
Yes, they don't align, but Enfield points out that if you place them in a shared gaming substrate, they converge semantically. We saw this in 2016 when Google Translate developed an internal interlingua, its own internal language, without being instructed to, purely from the pressure of shared learning.
I remember that, yeah.
We saw it with Facebook's FairLab negotiation bots creating their own shorthand. A shared gaming substrate acts as an evolutionary pressure cooker, allowing AI to grow into a unified support system organically. It's not forced integration, it's earned interoperability.
Okay, I understand the mechanism of emergent language in narrow parameters, but I deeply question the scalability of this premise.
Why?
Because it is one thing for an AI to develop an interlingua for a highly constrained translation task. It is one thing to have, say, 20 AI characters running on a single NVIDIA RTX 3090 processor with persistent memories in a small simulated town, which, yes, the 2024 Hartman Capital report noted as a breakthrough.
A massive breakthrough.
But it is vastly different to assume this organically grown AI convergence will safely scale up to govern complex human institutional dynamics across millions of people.
Why wouldn't it? Scale is what these systems do best.
Because you are talking about placing AI agents, acting as tacticians, medics, lore keepers, or behavioral monitors, into the direct loop of human governance. The unpredicted emergent behaviors in a sandbox game might be a fascinating quirk. The NPCs start throwing parties you didn't code for. Cute.
Right.
But the unpredicted emergent behaviors of a unified AI intelligence managing human learning and real-world institutional access could be catastrophic. What happens when the AI organically learns that the most efficient way to manage risk is to permanently restrict a user's access to society?
I'm not going to let you frame it that way, because I absolutely refuse to cede ground on this idea that scale inherently produces catastrophe.
It produces unpredictability.
It produces efficiency. Selection pressure toward a shared task does not produce chaos, it produces unity. Nobody engineered the Google Interlingua, the sheer necessity of the task demanded it. If gamified learning produces a 39% higher success rate in education, and AI can dynamically adapt to the learner, never rage quitting, never losing patience because a human teacher's schedule changes, then the scale is precisely what makes it a massive public good.
If it works perfectly.
If it scales in a massively multiplayer game environment, managing millions of concurrent, unpredictable player input seamlessly, it can absolutely scale to provide continuous, supportive learning environments for citizens. You are assuming the AI is a dictator in this system, but Enfield is explicitly arguing for AI as a companion. It flags without condemning. It alerts without arresting.
But, okay, alerting without arresting still requires the alert to be recorded. You cannot have a flag without a database. And this brings us right to the most troubling aspect of the entire terraforming philosophy, the continuous longitudinal profile.
I don't find it troubling at all.
You should! Enfield champions what he calls symmetrical accountability. He argues for a continuous profile where every citizen has a permanent record that follows them, tracked and supported by these AI companions. He claims that because the citizen has absolute backward audit rights, meaning the ability to see exactly what the institution recorded and challenge it, this is somehow an architecture of liberation. I strongly disagree.
Why? Symmetrical accountability puts the power of context back in the hands of the individual.
Because fragmentation is a crucial feature of human freedom.
I completely reject that.
Let me explain. The ability to be anonymous, the ability to leave one context and enter another with a completely clean slate, the right to start over, these are essential, hard-won liberties. An inescapable longitudinal profile where every mistake remains on a permanent AI-assisted record, even if it is corrected or challenged, eliminates true digital anonymity. It is a system of domination.
You are romanticizing fragmentation, and frankly, I find that incredibly dangerous.
Protecting privacy is dangerous?
Yes, when it looks like this. The current fragmented system is not freedom, it is unaccountable power. Right now, institutions and data brokers invisibly exploit fragmented data, and worse, they reduce human beings to a snapshot of their worst moments. Think about how a fragmented system works right now with background checks.
They check your history.
They take a single terrible frame of a 2-hour movie and use it to permanently define the entire film. One charge, one bad week, one diagnosis. How can you defend a system that judges a person by an isolated snapshot when a continuous record provides the vital context of an entire narrative arc?
Because the context...
A longitudinal profile doesn't condemn by accumulation, it protects by context. It shows a judge or an employer or a counselor not just the mistake, but the growth, the correction, the demonstrated capability over years. I am standing my ground on this. Context is protection.
And I defend the fragmented system because context in a database is still data, and data can and historically will be weaponized. Let's look closely at your movie frame analogy, okay? If you have the entire 2-hour film recorded, yes, you have context. But you also have a system that has fundamentally recorded the entire film of someone's private life. The premise that backward transparency protects the individual assumes a perfectly functioning, hyper-rational bureaucracy where a citizen's challenge to a record is given equal weight to the AI's assertion.
Which symmetrical accountability guarantees.
In theory. But that is not how power actually works in practice. A system designed to help a counselor notice behavioral shifts through digital phenotyping, tracking how often you use your device, your sleep patterns, your communication frequency, is, by definition, a surveillance infrastructure.
It's a support infrastructure.
Enfield argues it is fundamentally different if the goal is care rather than discipline. But the technology is exactly the same. The moral architecture he relies on is just a promise. And once the permanent behavioral record is built, it will be used by institutions in contexts its creators never anticipated.
You're trying to shift the focus to a hypothetical future misuse to scare the listener. But I have to ground us back in the brutal reality of what your preferred system is doing right now.
It's not my preferred system.
You claim fragmentation protects people, but the lack of a continuous educational record is exactly what drives the 92% recidivism rates we discussed at the start of the show. When a state cages a person without teaching them, it is abandoning them.
That is true.
Enfield makes a profound point that we cannot ignore. If the state can bring confinement to a person, if the infrastructure of punishment is portable, then the infrastructure of learning must be portable. We need a continuous profile, because what is learned inside an institution must not stay inside. It must travel with the person as a demonstrated capability profile.
I agree with portability, just not permanence.
You are defending a system that releases people from solitary confinement directly onto the streets with zero support, zero continuous tracking of growth, and zero educational continuity, all in the name of privacy and the right to start over. The right to start over with absolutely nothing is not a right. It's a trap.
Look, I am certainly not defending solitary confinement, and it is entirely unfair to suggest that valuing privacy equals endorsing institutional neglect. My point is that we do not have to build a continuous, ubiquitous tracking system to provide education. We do not have to dismantle the boundaries between our digital, private, and institutional lives to offer game-based learning.
How else do you do it?
Yes, Mario teaches algebra, and Minecraft teaches engineering. Yes, we should enthusiastically bring those tools into prisons and public schools. But we can provide a free, adaptive, interactive tablet to an incarcerated person without mandating that the data generated from that interaction follows them for the rest of their natural life in an AI-governed continuous profile. We can have support without total surveillance.
I am holding my ground here because support inherently requires memory. You cannot have an AI teammate that actually adapts to your learning style, recognizes your specific behavioral distress signals, and provides genuine contextual care if it is forced to forget you every time you change contexts.
It doesn't need to know everything to help with algebra.
Enfield notes that games are a training ground nobody designed. They teach timing, spatial reasoning, risk calibration. If we want to consciously design them to teach conflict de-escalation or emotional regulation, the system has to remember the user's baselines. The CDC recognizes that schools improve well-being through connection and support structures. Symmetrical accountability, knowing exactly what the system knows about you and being able to correct it, is the only way to build that connection safely. If you artificially fragment the data, you blind the support system. You literally force the mentor to forget the student.
And I maintain that a mentor who never forgets, who has perfect digital recall of every failure, and who shares that perfect recall with every future employer, housing provider, or institutional authority, ceases to be a mentor and becomes a warden. The transition from the video game remembers your choices to the state remembers your choices via an AI companion is a massive, incredibly dangerous leap.
It's a leap we have to take.
Now, I will agree that the current models of solitary confinement and passive, worksheet-based learning are empirical failures. We absolutely share a point of convergence there. Interactive, purposeful design holds profound, untapped potential for human development. I fully support modernizing our support structures and preserving digital worlds, but tearing down all institutional boundaries and fragmented identities in favor of an inescapable, continuous digital profile risks creating a system of total domination masquerading as care.
And I will summarize by saying that abandonment is not governance. We cannot continue to claim we are protecting people by keeping them in the dark, rationing their reality, and judging them by isolated snapshots of their worst moments. To genuinely rehabilitate and support human beings, we must build expansive, terraformed systems where education and gamified AI companions travel with the individual,
recognizing growth over permanent stigma.
It is a beautiful vision, I'll admit, but we must be incredibly cautious. The complexity of balancing safety, growth, and privacy cannot be solved simply by gamifying reality. While punitive systems are deeply flawed, certain boundaries and the fundamental right to be forgotten remain essential to human freedom.
Which brings us back to where we started. Do we build the greenhouse or do we build the bunker? Do we shape environments through transparency and the expectation of growth, or do we shape them through opacity and the expectation of threat? Enfield leads us with a profound framework to explore, and there is certainly much more to uncover in his work. We leave it to you, the listener, to decide which architecture our future institutions should adopt. Thank you for joining us.